Jason handed me a name tag that said Interim, at my own counter, at my husband's store. He did it like he was sliding a coaster under a sweating glass, tidy casual, not even looking up. You know, just until we modernize, he said, already turning to Lindsay. She nodded, tapping on a tablet like my life could be sorted by drop-down. I didn't say a thing. I set the little plastic tag next to the register and watched the front door instead. The bell, with the crack in it, the one Tom swore he'd replace, and never did. Out on Main Street, you could still see salt dust from last week's snow, a pickup idling in front of the diner, and the banner over the VFW that reads Friday, fish fry volunteers needed, because in our town, the same 12 people do everything and 5 of them are tired. Tom used to stand where Jason was standing. He kept a jar of peppermint sticks there, 3 for a quarter, even when quarters stopped being cute. He'd say, leave the lights on, Rach, every time he locked up like the store needed to know we were coming back. He's been gone 6 months. I don't like starting here at the part where dignity gets pinched small and labeled interim. But if I'm telling you how it went wrong, this is the moment I felt the floor tilt. Jason and Lindsay came up from Columbus the first week of October. They said they were here to help, which is an Ohio way of saying, we're going to fix what you had the nerve to build without us. They arrived with rolling luggage and a blueprint tube. Jason wore the cologne Tom hated, blue bottle smells like airport carpet and optimism, and Lindsay kept her sunglasses on in the store, like the fluorescent lights were paparazzi. They didn't look at the pegboard walls Tom painted himself. They didn't look at the Polaroid of the first roof we finished for Miss Beverly after the storm. They walked straight to the office Tom added after the flood, the one with the window that faces the alley and the file cabinet that sticks on the second drawer, and closed the door. I heard the printer before I heard my name. Here's the hook you're probably waiting for. The big insult, the line that snaps and stings. It wasn't a line. It was a room they opened without me. That door stayed shut all morning. Contractors came in twice. One was a man with a measuring wheel and 2 white sneakers. He nodded at me like a hostess and asked for Jason by name. I was standing under the ceiling fan Tom installed the summer the AC died. I could tell you exactly which blade has the chip from where the ladder hit it. These are the kinds of details you remember when the big things like your husband disappear. You hold what's left, even if it's just a chip. When they came out of the office, Lindsay had a smile the color of a Band-Aid. We're doing a soft audit, Rachel, she said. Nothing scary. Branding. Foot traffic analysis. SKUs. She said SKUs like it was French. I asked if she meant SKUs and she blinked once. Right, that. Anyway, we're looking at changing the name. Morgan Home Plus reads more coastal, more modern. Tom Morgan kept this store open through 2 recessions, I said. That's exactly why we need to leverage the legacy, Jason chirped. Or else, what was the point? The point was 1,000 Saturdays and 1,000 small kindnesses nobody wrote down. The point was fixing Mrs. Harlan's back steps when her son forgot her birthday. The point was Tom driving the plow at 5 a.m. so people could get to church without breaking a hip. I didn't say that. I took a breath, counted to 5, my pastor calls it a one-hand prayer, and took the trash out back. The alley smells like damp cardboard and cigarette breaks. I stood there by our dented dumpster and pressed my palm to the cool metal. I don't know why. Maybe to make sure something in this world still pushed back. That's when I saw him, Noah, sitting on the tailgate of his old Ford with a coffee he didn't buy from us. Figured you'd need this, he said, holding up a second cup. Noah Baines had been Tom's friend since they both punched a clock at the factory that got bulldozed to make room for a second car wash we didn't need. He's retired now, law, not factory, and he wears his years like a good coat. People in town tell him things they shouldn't, and he keeps them like pennies, not worth much alone, but you save them anyway. I took the coffee. I didn't trust my voice. He didn't ask the obvious question. He kept his eyes on the brick across the alley where someone painted a crooked heart years ago, and no one painted over it. Paper doesn't blink. he said after a minute, as if picking up a conversation we weren't having yet. When folks start closing doors, you start making copies. I nodded like I understood, and maybe I did. The hurt hadn't turned to anger yet. It was still syrup thick, slow sticking to everything. The rest of that week played like a very boring horror movie. Every scene looked normal if you didn't know what you were looking at. Lindsay started rearranging her word, not mine, moving the screws and nails to clear canisters with white labels that said things like 1.5 bright common. She said it was about visibility. Jason stood behind the counter and told a farmer from out on County 3 that we'd be phasing out the old credit system Tom kept for folks who could only pay at harvest. The farmer, Mr. Albright, stared at Jason like he'd just told him the sky was closed. Tom knew me when I had one cow and my truck coughed smoke, he said slowly. You don't. Jason smiled the way people smile when they've already made the decision. This is just best practice. Mr. Albright turned to me. Rachel, I should have said not today. Not ever. I should have put that interim tag in the shredder and told them to find a new town to practice on. Instead, I did what women like me do when there's a storm and the roof is tired. You shove another bucket under the drip and keep taking orders. We'll talk, I told him. Give me till Monday. Jason didn't love that. Later, he cornered me by the paint swatches and explained margins in a tone that would have made a third grader yawn. We're bleeding, he said, tapping a printed spreadsheet like it was a diagnosis he invented. We need higher-end customers. We're rebranding for weddings and home journaling girls. I looked at the aisle of sandpaper and shop towels and imagined someone posing with a ring light. We sell bolts, I said. We could sell experiences, Lindsay whispered, like the word might fly away. I think that's the moment something hard inside me clicked into place. Not anger yet, just a simple flat no. You know how sometimes you hear the car key turning outside and know if it's your husband or your kid just from the sound? This was like that. I heard my no lock. They didn't hear it. They kept planning. There was a pastor's luncheon that Thursday down in the church basement. You know the room folding chairs, a piano with one key that always sticks posters for last year's blood drive curling at the edges. They invited community partners, which is code for anyone who might write a check. Lindsay stood at the podium and described a new phase for Morgan Retail, a modern community hub, and I sat at the back next to Miss Carol, who's run the salon on Elm since before any of us had Gray to prove it. Miss Carol leaned over. She talking about your store or a juice bar? Unclear, I said. When they opened the floor for questions, Miss Carol stood up so fast, her chair scraped loud enough to make the custodian flinch. Question, she called out. Have you told the widow what you're doing with her husband's name? Or is this one of those, we'll loop her in after we get the grant situations? The room hummed. Lindsay's smile thinned to a paper cut. Jason lifted the mic like a game show host. We value Rachel's input tremendously. Miss Carol didn't sit, then let her speak. There, it was the first little reversal. Nothing fixed, nothing solved. Just a woman with good hairspray and better instincts making room for me to breathe. People turned. The weight of looking is a lot when you're the one being examined. I walked to the front slow on purpose. My heels clicked on the linoleum. It's a small, silly sound, but it made me feel like I still owned my body. I wasn't ready to fight. I didn't have the words. So I told the truth I could live with Tom, started this store with a toolbox and a prayer. We'll take questions about changing his name after I've had a chance to read what's been written in it. I looked at Jason. All of it. No one clapped. That's not how our town works. But I saw Pastor Jim stop stacking paper plates and stand still. I saw the custodian glance at me and nod once. Small things. Pennies. That night, I went home and poured coffee into Tom's travel mug, the one with the chipped rim, and sat at the kitchen table with the brass store key in my hand. It's heavier than you'd think. Maybe everything old is heavy because it's carried so many mornings. I opened Tom's black binder. It was there where he always kept it copies of the incorporation papers, the deed, the insurance, a photocopy of a handwritten letter he never mailed. If something happens to me, it began pay the people first. Keep the lights on. The store is a promise. I don't cry pretty. No one does really. But I didn't cry then. I traced the line with my finger and realized I'd been waiting for someone to give me permission to do what I already knew was right. Maybe that's where it truly went wrong, not with Jason's name tag or Lindsay's sunglasses, but with me believing I needed their blessing to keep a promise I'd made long before they rolled their luggage over our welcome mat. A voicemail I hadn't heard before blinked on Tom's old flip phone, the one I couldn't bring myself to shut off. It was Noah. "Door's open if you need a printer," he said, and Rachel paper doesn't blink. I looked at the key again. The brass had a small nick near the teeth, a notch Tom filed himself after the lock started sticking in winter. He'd called it a fix you don't see until you need it. I didn't know it yet, but that tiny notch was going to save me. If you're still with me, stick around. This story has a way of taking its time, then turning quick. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I want to know how far a small town story can travel. I didn't flip a switch and turn into some mastermind overnight. I wish it worked like that, like you hear one voicemail, hold one brass key, and suddenly know exactly what to do. No. The next few weeks were slow, quiet, and sticky. The kind of days where you feel like you're moving through syrup. You do your chores, make your coffee, open the store, but the air is heavier, and every conversation feels like it's been rehearsed without you. Jason and Lindsay started showing up earlier than me. At first, I thought it was enthusiasm. I'd unlock the front door at 8, and the lights would already be on their coats hanging by the office. But I noticed the office door closed more often now, and when I'd walk in, Lindsay's laptop would click shut like a reflex. Jason would clear his throat and start talking about inventory adjustments, like I'd just interrupted an important phone call. I kept my voice even. You know I still have the store's books at my house. Jason smiled, that "don't worry your head" smile. We've got digital backups. Just streamlining. Streamlining. Their favorite word lately. It meant we're moving things around without telling you, but it's for your own good. That's when I started collecting. I made copies of everything I could get my hands on: loan papers, vendor contracts, the incorporation certificate Tom framed in the back room. I even scanned the old employee ledgers where Tom kept notes in the margins. Larry needs advance for truck repairs. Mona overtime okay for Christmas. Paper didn't blink. I kept the copies in a plain manila folder in my tote bag. It went everywhere with me: grocery store, church, even the post office. I figured if they wanted to play secret games, I'd make sure the scoreboard was mine. It's a strange thing watching people underestimate you in real time. They stop explaining things. They stop asking for your input. They start speaking over you in meetings, soft at first, then louder when you don't push back. One morning, Lindsay came in with a mood board. Yes, a mood board for Morgan Home Plus. She'd printed pictures of artisan candles, brushed gold shelving, and 3 very expensive-looking espresso machines. She slid it across the counter. "We want the store to feel aspirational," she said, like the bolts, nails, and lawnmower belts were just in the way. I flipped through the pages. And the inventory. Jason grinned. "We'll keep a little of the old stuff, just for charm." Charm. That's what Tom's life's work had been reduced to, a prop in their boutique fantasy. I didn't argue. That was my shift now. No head-on collisions, no big speeches, just small, steady moves. I called Noah that afternoon from the break room. "You still have that copier?" "Always," he said. "And Rachel, if they're meeting without you, they're building something with your name on it." I stopped by his place after closing. His kitchen smelled like cedar and coffee, same as always. He had the copier already warmed up. I handed him the folder from my tote bag, and we started feeding pages through one after another. Between the hum of the machine, Noah said, "You ever hear of a community trust?" I shook my head. "It's a way to protect property. Locks it down for a specific purpose. Folks can't just sell it off without breaking the charter." The paper slid out warm. I didn't answer. I was still learning to keep my cards close. The next week, Jason brought in a man in a sport coat and shiny loafers. "Property appraiser," he said. "Just getting some numbers for insurance." Insurance, my foot. I watched him walk around with a clipboard, noting measurements, glancing at the ceiling beams Tom had sanded himself. When they stepped outside for privacy, I followed, leaning against the doorway. "Everything all right?" I asked. Jason didn't miss a beat. Routine. Just being thorough. The appraiser gave me a half smile, the kind you give someone who doesn't need to know. I memorized the name on his badge. That night, I wrote it in my notebook. I'd started keeping one small blue leather cover fits in my coat pocket. It held every name date and odd little moment I thought might matter later. It was Miss Carroll again who gave me my second little jolt of resolve. She came in for a gallon of white paint and stood at the counter talking like she always did, her words sugar-dusted with gossip. "You know, they're showing that fancy board of theirs to the Rotary next week," she said. I shook my head. Calling it Phase 1. She lowered her voice. "They didn't invite you, did they?" I smiled without humor. Guess they forgot. Miss Carroll tapped her nails on the counter. "Then you show up anyway." I didn't, though. Not yet. Instead, I sent Noah. He sat in the back of that Rotary meeting with his quiet eyes and listened to every word. When he stopped by the store afterward, he just said, "They're positioning you as the exit strategy." What does that mean? It means once they get what they want, you're a line item labeled phase out. The words sat heavy in my chest. Not shocking, just confirming what my gut already knew. That Sunday after church, I stayed behind in the sanctuary. Everyone else was downstairs eating sheet cake for the youth choir fundraiser. I walked the aisles, touching the end of each pew. It's a habit I picked up years ago. Something about the worn wood under my hand makes me think clearer. I thought about Tom. How he'd lean on the counter after closing arms, folded eyes scanning the shelves, like he was memorizing the inventory by heart. How he'd once told me a store's not just walls and stock, it's a promise to show up. And I realized that's what I'd been doing these weeks. Showing up, keeping the lights on, watching, collecting. But a promise isn't kept by standing still. The shift came on a Wednesday. Jason and Lindsay had an early meeting with a branding consultant, and I was stocking screws when I overheard the consultant ask, "And who holds the property title right now?" Jason's voice dropped, but I caught it anyway. "Technically Rachel, but that'll change." That was my line in the sand. I closed the register at 5, drove to Noah's, and said, "Tell me about that community trust again. We stayed up until midnight drafting reading signing." Noah knew the right grant programs. I knew the land's history, the store's weight in this town. By the time I left, the first steps were already in motion. I didn't tell Jason and Lindsay. Not yet. I let them keep thinking I was the interim quiet predictable, already halfway out the door. But I started moving differently, keeping my phone on me during their meetings, filing papers in a new locked drawer, calling vendors directly instead of letting Jason streamline. And every night before I turned off the store lights, I'd stand at the counter, the brass key warm in my palm, and remind myself promises aren't kept by accident. If you're still here, stick around because the night I finally told them what I'd done, well, let's just say they stopped calling me interim real fast. If you've ever been in a room where everyone's smiling, but you can feel the trap under the table, you'll understand how that night felt. Jason called it a strategic family dinner. Lindsay, of course, dressed like she was meeting investors, cream blazer gold hoops, and that perfume that smells like the cosmetics counter at Macy's. They set the long table in the back of the store, like it was a banquet hall. White tablecloths, polished silverware I hadn't seen since our anniversary dinners with Tom. Even lit a few candles. "Presentation matters," Jason said when I raised an eyebrow. "Tonight is about vision." Vision. I'd been hearing that word a lot lately. Usually right before someone tells you why the thing you care about needs to be torn down. I walked in carrying a simple manila folder. Not thick, not dramatic. just enough to keep my hands steady and my face neutral. Inside were the trust papers Noah and I had finished the week before. Signed, notarized, filed. They didn't know that yet. Dinner started polite enough. Some kind of roasted chicken Lindsay claimed was farm to table, though I'd seen the grocery store bag in the trash earlier. Jason poured wine, leaning into his role as host. Halfway through the meal, he set his glass down and cleared his throat. So Rachel, we think now's the perfect time to start talking next steps. Lindsay reached for her leather folder like she was unveiling state secrets. She pulled out glossy pages and slid them across to me. Each one was a rendering our store, but unrecognizable. Wide glass doors, bistro tables outside, a creative co-working space upstairs, the pegboard walls gone replaced with white shiplap and Edison bulbs. We're calling it the Morgan Market, she said, a modern community hub. Jason jumped in. This would honor Dad's name while moving us into a profitable future. Profitable for who I didn't say it. I just flipped the pages slowly, letting them think I was taking it in. They talked numbers, lease revenue from upstairs offices, coffee sales margins, partnerships with local artisans. I noticed the projected income column in their spreadsheet had Jason and Lindsay's initials next to the largest payouts. My name was nowhere. When they finished their pitch, they sat back waiting. Like I was supposed to clap. Instead, I set their folder aside and opened mine. I appreciate the effort, I said evenly. But you should know ownership of the store property and the adjoining lot has already been transferred. Jason's smile faltered. Lindsay blinked twice fast. It's been placed into the Morgan Community Trust, I continued. Chartered for the sole purpose of preserving this store and land for community use. It can't be sold repurposed or leased for private profit without violating the trust's binding terms. Silence. The candles flickered. Jason leaned forward, his voice tight. You did what? I slid the signed trust charter across the table. It's filed with the county, effective last week. Lindsay's tone went sharp. You had no right to. Actually, I interrupted. I had every right. My name is on the deed. Tom left me that responsibility, and I fulfilled it. Jason's jaw worked like he was grinding gravel. You're dismantling everything Dad worked for. No, I said, my voice steady. I'm protecting it. From being turned into something he never wanted. They started talking over each other, then legal review, financial implications, unnecessary secrecy. I just let them run out of words. When they finally stopped, I said, the Trust Council includes Noah the Mayor and Pastor Jim. The community's behind it. This store will stay what Tom built it to be a place that serves people, not a brand portfolio. Lindsay pushed back from the table hard enough to rattle the silverware. Jason stayed seated, staring at the papers, like they might rewrite themselves. You'd think I felt triumphant in that moment, but I didn't. I felt clean. Like someone had finally opened a window after months of stale air. They left without dessert. Didn't even bother with polite goodbyes. The next morning, they tried a different tactic. Jason came in alone, hands in his pockets. Look, Rachel, I think we just got off on the wrong foot last night. Maybe we can restructure the trust. No, I said. He tried again. What if we keep the trust but lease part of the space for... No. After the third no, he stopped smiling. You've made this impossible. I stepped around the counter, looked him straight in the eye. No, Jason. I've made it final. By Friday, word had spread. Miss Carroll stopped by with a potted plant and a sly grin. Mr. Albright came in for nails and said, heard you told him to take a long walk. Good. It wasn't about revenge. It was about balance, about putting the store back where it belonged. But make no mistake, that night at the table was the moment the balance shifted. And once it shifted, I wasn't about to let it tip back. That weekend, I walked through the store alone after closing. The shelves still smelled faintly of sawdust and oil. I ran my hand along the counter Tom had built the brass key heavy in my pocket. I thought about all the times I'd stayed quiet in my life, all the times I'd let other people fill the silence with their plans. Not anymore. Because here's the thing about a breaking point, It's not always loud. Sometimes it's just one sentence, one signed paper, one steady voice that says, "No, this ends here." And when it happens, you don't go back. If you're still listening, stay with me because the fallout from that dinner, oh, it was messy. And it showed me exactly who they were when the facade cracked. By Monday morning, the air in the store had changed. Not for me, I'd slept fine. But Jason and Lindsay came in stiff, tight-lipped, like kids who'd been told no for the first time in their lives. They didn't even greet the first customers. Jason sat in the office with the blinds half closed. Lindsay wandered the aisles pretending to check stock, but mostly scrolling her phone. I knew that look. They were regrouping. By midweek, the emails started. One from Jason requesting full review of trust documents for potential restructuring options. One from Lindsay concerned about public perception if changes aren't implemented. I didn't answer either. Instead, I forwarded them to Noah. He replied within the hour. Let them write. Every word is a record now. The real shift happened on Thursday. Mr. Albright stopped by for more nails and said heard the news about the trust. Good on you. Then Miss Carroll came in with a tray of muffins, baked fresh. Don't you dare pay me for these. By Friday, the mayor's wife was leaning over the counter saying, if you need someone on the volunteer roster, you call me first. It was subtle, but you could feel it. The town was picking a side. And it wasn't theirs. Jason noticed too. I caught him standing at the front window one afternoon, watching Miss Carroll walk across the street with her coffee. She's been talking, he said flatly. People talk, I answered, especially when they care. He didn't like that answer. Lindsay tried the professional route. She printed out a packet titled Morgan Market Phase 2 Projections and left it on the counter. I didn't even flip it open, just slid it back to her. Not relevant anymore. Her smile tightened like a knot. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I'm making it exactly as hard as it should be, I said, and walked away. By the second week, their tone had shifted from persuasive to cold. They stopped asking questions, stopped making small talk. When customers came in, they barely looked up. One morning, Jason didn't show at all. Lindsay claimed he had meetings in Columbus. An hour later, Miss Carroll came in, waving a flyer she'd found at the coffee shop, some entrepreneurship seminar Jason was hosting, using photos of our store in the background. Thought you should see this? She said, sliding it across the counter. I took a picture and sent it straight to Noah. He called 10 minutes later. That, he said, is why we put the non-commercial clause in the trust. Let him try it, he won't get far. The weeks that followed were quieter. Not peaceful exactly. More like the kind of quiet you get before a storm hits. But I wasn't waiting for lightning anymore. I started moving forward. First step, bringing back people who cared. I called Mona, who'd worked here 20 years before Jason pushed her out for lack of alignment. She was back behind the counter by Friday, wearing her old name tag and smiling like she'd never left. Then I called Larry, our best repair guy, who knew more about fixing mowers than anyone within 50 miles. He came in, shook my hand, and said, "Guess the place is in good hands again." With them back, the store started to feel alive. Customers stayed longer. Conversations filled the air. The old coffee pot in the back was always on again. I took Tom's original sketches for the store layout found in that black binder and had Larry build the display table he'd designed but never made. Solid oak, clean lines. It sat right in the middle of the floor, and it was the first thing people saw when they walked in. Around that time, the mayor stopped by. He'd heard about the trust from Noah. This is exactly what this town needs, he told me. We've got too many good places getting bought out by outsiders. He offered to host a ribbon cutting for the new era of Morgan Hardware. I said yes, but only if we could make it about the community, not me. The day of the event, half the town showed up. Kids from the high school shop class stood by their projects. Miss Carroll brought cupcakes with little frosting hammers on top. The mayor gave a short speech about legacy, then handed me the giant scissors. When I cut that ribbon, the cheer that went up wasn't for me, it was for the store, for Tom, for what we'd kept alive. Jason and Lindsay didn't come. They sent a single email the next day. We regret that our professional relationship has reached an impasse. We'll be focusing on other ventures moving forward. Translation, we lost. I won't lie, there was a small, sharp satisfaction in reading that. But it wasn't the point. The point was that the store was ours again. Not mine, alone, ours. That evening, I locked up after dark, the windows glowing from inside. I stood out on the sidewalk, brass key in hand, and just listened. Through the glass, I could see Mona wiping the counter, Larry stacking the new display. The place hummed the way it used to, steady and sure. A part of me wanted to call Tom's old voicemail and tell him everything. But instead, I whispered it right there on Main Street. Lights are on, Tom. Just like you said. If you're still here, don't go anywhere, because in the final part, I'll tell you how this turned into something even bigger than a win for me. How we took what they tried to dismantle and made it into a legacy they can't touch. A few months passed, and the dust finally settled. Not a word from Jason or Lindsay. No emails, no just checking in calls. And that was fine. The store found its rhythm again. Saturdays got busy enough that I'd have to make an extra pot of coffee by 10 a.m. Kids from the high school shop class would swing by to grab scrap wood for projects. Mona kept a bowl of peppermint sticks on the counter like Tom used to. Larry somehow found time to repaint the back storage room without even being asked. It wasn't flashy, but it was steady. And steady is what keeps the lights on. One morning in early spring, I was unlocking the front door when a young woman walked up the sidewalk. Couldn't have been more than 25. She hesitated at the entrance like she wasn't sure she belonged here. "You open?" she asked. "Always," I said. Her name was Jenna. She'd just moved to town and was taking classes at the community college construction management of all things. She needed part-time work and had heard this was the place where people get treated right. I don't know who told her that, but it stuck with me. We hired her that week. She was quiet at first, but she listened. She learned the way Tom used to teach, slow hands-on, no rush. A month in, she could run the register, find any size bolt without looking twice, and talk an elderly farmer through the difference between two mower blades, like she'd been born doing it. One Friday afternoon, I caught her tracing her finger over the brass key hanging behind the counter. "Feels heavy," she said. It should, I told her. It opens more than a door. The trust became more than just a piece of paper. It turned into a living thing. We set aside a corner of the store for a neighbor's first shelf supplies, donated for anyone who needed them. No questions asked. Larry started teaching free repair clinics on Saturday mornings. Mona organized a fundraiser for the volunteer fire department right in the parking lot. The store wasn't just surviving. It was giving back the way Tom had always wanted. About 6 months after that dinner, the one where I told Jason and Lindsay the land was gone from their reach, I was cleaning out the back office and found Tom's old cigar box. Inside, under the ticket stubs and bent nails, was a folded note in his handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means you kept going. I knew you would. The store was never just mine, Rach. It was ours. And one day, it'll be theirs too. The ones who show up and care enough to keep the lights on." I sat there for a long time with that note in my lap. The afternoon sun came through the dusty blinds, hitting the grain of the desk just right. And for the first time since he'd passed, I didn't feel the weight of holding it all together. I felt past two, trusted. The first anniversary of the trust, we had a small gathering. No ribbon cutting, no speeches. Just coffee sandwiches from the diner and the people who'd made it possible. Jenna brought her boyfriend and showed him the display table Larry built. Larry brought his grandson, who ran laps around the paint aisle. Miss Carol brought a lemon cake because we needed something sweet to cut the coffee. We didn't talk about Jason or Lindsay. Not because we were avoiding it, but because they just didn't matter anymore. A few weeks later, I saw Lindsay's car parked outside the cafe on Main. She didn't see me. Or maybe she did and just looked away. There was no satisfaction in it, just a quiet understanding that we were done orbiting each other's lives. Now, every evening before I lock up, I do what Tom used to do. I stand behind the counter, rest my hands on the wood, and let my eyes travel the room. Not to check stock or count customers, but to remind myself this is what we saved. Sometimes Jenna's still in the back finishing up an order. Sometimes Mona's laughing with the last customer of the day. And sometimes it's just me and the hum of the lights. I still keep the brass key in my pocket, even though I could leave it on the hook. It's not about access, it's about carrying the promise with me. The lesson that protecting something doesn't always mean standing guard at the gate ready for a fight. Sometimes it means building the kind of foundation no one can shake, so when the storm comes, you don't just survive it. You stay open. Tom used to say, "We're just keeping the lights on for the next person." I used to think that was about business hours. Now I know it's about more than that. It's about leaving the door open for the ones who will come after you. The ones who will take the key in their hand, feel its weight, and understand that it opens more than a door. If this story makes you think of something you've had to protect, no matter how small, share it. Because somewhere out there, someone's standing in their own quiet store, holding their own heavy key, wondering if they've got it in them to keep the lights on. And trust me, you do.